Welcome to this week's Eccentric Minute, brought to you by Eccentric. This week's Eccentric Minute is one of my favorite exercises to do with the K-pulley, and that is the pull-through. Guys, once you've figured out about how far you need to walk out with the K-pulley, grab whatever attachment you're using for the pulley, walk yourself out there, and really push your hips back at the K-pulley. From there, when you hit that stretch, really punch your hips forward, keep your chest up, and try to extend your knees and your hips all the way through. And this is where one of the major benefits of using a flywheel kicks in, as it pulls you into a deeper stretch as you push your hips back into your hamstrings and your hip extensors, so that you really open it up and stretch everything out in the back. This is an exercise that I'm sure your athletes are going to love to hate, but reap awesome rewards from. I really hope you enjoyed this week's Eccentric Minute. Make sure you check them out at eccentric.com to find out everything you need about the K-box and the K-pulley. Being a strength and conditioning professional requires constant pursuit of better knowledge, better methods, and better means. But what if there was a place where strength and conditioning coaches could learn from some of the most innovative practitioners in the world, such as Jeff Moyer, Lachlan Wilmot, William Wayland, James the Thinker Smith, and Keir Wenham Flatt? Well, you could find multiple lectures from each of these top-level coaches and a few lectures and examples from yours truly as well, all in the Strength Coach Network. The Strength Coach Network is going to bring you well over 100 different lectures from some of the top practitioners in the world to be your one-stop shop for your continuing education and professional development. So hop on over to strengthcoachnetwork.com/CVASP today and get your 48-hour trial for only $1. That's strengthcoachnetwork.com/CVASPS to get your 48-hour trial for only $1. I look forward to seeing you in the Strength Coach Network.
What's up, dude? Hey, how you doing, Jay?
Oh, man, just living the life. And another day,
doubt.
It just seems like the clouds don't want to stop emptying.
Yeah, we're not too different over here in Mississippi, so.
AJ, what's good, bro? Long time no see. Yeah, man. I'm fired up to rap a bit, dude. Y'all got a lot of interesting stuff cooking down there, so I'm really fired up to, trying to get into some of your meat and potatoes that you've been doing with the teams and hear more about that. And, again, as always, opening it up for everybody. If you've got questions for Coach, make sure you fire away. But, yeah, man, let's kind of get right into it here.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I know you talked to Steph Mock, my boss, a couple days ago, and she's our fearless leader of kind of the whole, I guess what you say, the meat and potatoes that we've kind of tried to instill here lately. But yeah, I'm happy to dive into whatever you'd like to, man.
Yeah. So, well, first, I think that let's let people know who you're with down there and what things that you've been doing specifically in the past 12 months that can get people fired up.
Yeah, so, and I guess, I'm not really a big name or anything, but my name's Aaron DuVall. So I'm the strength coach, assistant strength coach at Mississippi State, work under Stephanie Mock. My primary team responsibilities are soccer and tennis. So over the past 12 months, I think that a lot of the things that we've, at least on my end, have kind of prioritized, I'll kind of bucket it into 3 different categories. One is building a relationship with our engineering department and kind of the things that we've been able to facilitate from a lot of our technology assessment and monitoring stuff. I think another thing that we've really tried to build out is the collaboration with a lot of our other staffs with our new AMS system. So we're using Coach Me Plus and kind of how we've integrated that and tried to tie that into a lot of the wearables that we have, a lot of the questionnaires that we have, and just the testing and stuff and profiling that we do on our athletes. And then, lastly, just kind of doing our job, training our athletes, and especially right now, just doing the best we can to make sure that they're still doing stuff. It's definitely a weird period for us right now, and not really a lot of the experiences that we've had have kind of prepared us for what we're doing currently. But it's been a fun challenge, and we've had definitely a big period of growth throughout it all. So it's been good.
Yeah, man. Let's get into that stuff with the engineering department. I think that ticks a couple of big boxes. And the first is working across campus. which is something that I think a lot of people have a hard time with. And the second is just like, what are you doing with your engineering department?
Yeah, so I think we're really, really lucky to have the partnership that we've had kind of going with our engineering department. So I know a lot of schools have a pretty good relationship with, like, say, their kinesiology department, and we do as well. We came across working with one of our industrial engineer professors, and he was doing a study with our football team at the time on some sort of helmet study with reaction time and potential CTE mitigation. But after talking with him, he was a guy that was like, "Hey, I love working with athletics. We're building a human performance lab over in our Cavs lab on campus, and they had a big mocap system, force plates, a few other testing avenues that they were trying to do with more human subjects instead of vehicular subjects." And he was like, "Man, give us some people to study and look at, and we'll try to return the favor however we can." So that's kind of how it all facilitated. Since then, it's grown to something kind of a concept that we've tried to build of athlete engineering. And it's basically a collaboration between strength conditioning and our engineering department that has kind of blown up into this weird mixture of like industrial and systems engineering, strength conditioning, sports science, human psychology, and just trying to kind of merge all those pretty different realms together. So we're actually now we're at the point where we're trying to build a little bit more of an extensive lab on campus. So we've put in a $500,000 grant to try to get some equipment in one of our kind of empty rooms on campus. We are hosting, hopefully still hosting, our first athlete engineering conference this June 10th and 11th. We have some really good speakers coming to that, so we're real excited. It'll be the kind of the first of its kind, we think, just kind of from the mix of people that we're going to have come in and talk during it. But we're excited about that. Hopefully, it's still going to be in the mix. We don't know what June's going to hold by then, but still, the relationship and the things that have started to foster with us have been really fun for us and really interesting. It's come to the point now where I actually have a couple engineering students interning under me, and we have them working on a few different projects with really data collection, analytics, and organization of a lot of the stuff that we've been trying to do, but maybe don't have quite the time or patience to do. Just because we have to coach athletes and manage coaches and everything else as well. So yeah, that's been probably one of the bigger projects that we've had going on, I guess, this past 12 months or so. And I think the growth of it's been pretty exponential, and we're excited to see where it ends up leading, especially with a few of the projects that we have going on.
Yeah, dude, that's pretty rad. So I want to talk a little bit more about that, especially like the what's and how's you're looking at, especially since my boy MJ just hopped on, because I know he's diving through miles of GPS data right now. But
Yeah.
I think that it's easy to collect, it's easy to get, but now like how is using an engineering student providing you guys like a different sort of lens to look through when it comes to what these numbers actually are and mean and those sort of things?
Yeah, I think the biggest help for us that have been from them has been we are we're better maybe at like asking the questions that we want answered, and they're good at fidgeting through the numbers, running certain programs like Power BI or R to help maybe answer those questions, and then even build out some systems or potential softwares to kind of help us organize and utilize our data a little bit better. To give an example, so you're talking about like miles of GPS data. I mean, so we use Polar Team Pro with a few of our sports, and it was a little bit daunting when I first got involved with it. I knew that there were things that I wanted to be able to do from a practice planning standpoint to give the coaches, but I didn't really have the skill set to be able to build out a program that kind of helped them program their practices. So now we're getting to the point where I'm working with one of our doctoral engineering students, and he's kind of helping me. We take a lot of the GPS data from each session. We break that down into like 7 or 8 different categories that the coaches deem important. So, amount of cuts, high speed running, total distance, training load, a few other things. And taking their practice plans that they give me, so all the different drills and activities that they do in a session, and then trying to build out a program to where we can actually preemptively program sessions based upon the physical demands that they want to accomplish in a training session. Or conversely, if they want to say, hey, we have this theme of a training session that we want to accomplish. So whether it's like up tempo possession or defensive principles, and they don't really they need to see like what type of physical demands that historically those sessions have kind of given the athletes. They can look at that and then pick certain drills from there as well. So building out a program to be able to do all that is something that I'm just not able to do, nor really have the patience to. But we have a lot of really bright minds with our engineering students that are really good with like Power BI, Excel, and R programming that have really helped kind of build that out. I mean, we're still definitely in the infant works of it, but just things like that have been a huge help for us and helping us do our job and give a better product to the coaches, as well as give some of these engineering students some pretty cool, what we think is pretty cool experience in athletics as well.
Yeah, yeah. And free workforce is always, as MJ said, smart man. So devil's advocate, because at times with these things, like I kind of organized and built some of this stuff myself back in the day. And the reason I try to do it all myself is because I wanted to know if something started to not work, where the problems were, so I could go back and I knew where they were to fix them.
Mm-hmm.
How are these doctoral candidates or these grad students, how are they educating your staff to be able to better understand what they're doing, so that like 3 years down the road, right? Like let's say it turns out total volume of running doesn't matter, and there's part of your algorithm that has too much weight in, so that's got to get pulled out. Like instead of you just hitting, select all in this column, delete, and crossing your fingers and being like, well, shit, here we go.
Yeah.
Like, how are they helping you guys better understand how to impact the data yourself and how to reinterpret the information so that you're able to make the manipulations necessary?
Yeah, I think so. Like what you're talking about, the algorithm and the weight of everything. I think that that's really applicable to people that may only identify training load. It's such an ambiguous term, but the training load is kind of one of those influential markers in what should dictate training decisions. I don't necessarily think that's the case, and that's why like I said, we pick about 7 or 8 different qualities that we get from the collected data and try to break it down individually by those, because I think the kind of the collaboration of all of them is what really helps paint the picture of what the athletes are exposed to in each session, or throughout the 3-year span like you're talking about. I don't know if it's so much that like these students are helping us sorry. I don't know if they're really helping us do like to teach us like what we should be necessarily doing. Or they can do a really good job of getting. Oh, sorry. Are you there? We got some bad
Yep, we're
Wi-Fi,
good.
so if I go in and out, I apologize.
All
So
good, man.
if they are really good, I think, with like helping us identify outliers in certain things, and I think for us, it's really just a good way of using historical data for immediate practical application. So it's hard for us. I don't want to say like, oh, we can look at all this and see where an athlete got hurt and what were the leading causes up to that point. I think that there's enough research out there already that's kind of identified certain factors, either acute to chronically, or a jump in certain qualities that they're not really prepared for that have kind of led to some injuries. But I mean, you can't predict any injury or every injury. So I don't really know if they're really helping us answer a lot of those questions so much as just really giving us an avenue to better understand our previous training, and then using what we've done in previous training to, again, try to make better decisions on what we're going to do in future training, if that makes sense.
Yeah, could you give an example of that?
Yeah, so I'll give a couple of examples. So I think so. One thing that we did, or so we 2 years ago, we had a different coaching staff than the coaching staff we have now. With the old coaching staff, right, wrong, or indifferent for either coaching staff, the previous coaching staff was just a very, very, very volume based coaching style and practice style. I mean, girls were accruing up to like 8-9 miles in just a practice session. Pretty, yeah, astronomical. And, I think that they were getting so much volume. And after, doing that for several years, I think that a lot of them were just more used to that. But they weren't a very fast paced training style. Like the density and the intensity of their sessions weren't quite very high. So when a new coaching staff came in, they were just kind of the opposite. They didn't want to be on the feet too long, but they wanted to make sure that practices were very dense, very intense when they needed to be, and they did a really good job of undulating kind of the demands of that. But I think kind of the spike or as we noticed, more of a spike in what the girls were used to in terms of like, hey, like we probably used to spend a little bit too much time on our feet and covered a little bit too much volume, but I think we're trending in a really high acute part of that high speed running or the high magnitude of accelerations. So helping the coaches understand like how we can still accomplish the type of training style that they want to give the athletes, but it may take a little bit more time to kind of build into that. So I think that's kind of one example. Another example I'll use another thing that we do with a lot of it is we try to take in all the subjective data that we get from our athletes as well. So, we can collect all this objective data and paint a good picture of these athletes and what they're getting exposed to on the field. But if we're not really asking them like, how do you feel and where are you sore, where do you have pain, then I don't think we're really doing the full extent of our job. So we noticed we had an empty week before the national tournament, and we were doing a lot more ball striking, a lot more PKs, and haven't really done that too much in practices beforehand. So objectively, from a like our wearable standpoint, from a polar standpoint, a lot of our external load looked really, really good. Like we were covering just the right amount of distance, right amount of speed, density, cutting. The practices were really well undulated, but we started seeing after the first couple of days, like a lot of hip flexors flaring up and from like just a soreness, and kind of identified like, oh, well, where's this coming from? And I think it just invokes conversation with the athletes of like, hey, well, I think it's because we're doing all this, and that's the only thing different that I can see. And so that's a little bit more of an immediate example of how that's instilled change in training. But that's something that we'd also like to do, or that we also want to take into account when we're creating these programs to maybe build out sessions based on physical qualities. Is how does it really make the girls subjectively feel too? Because say if we're going into season and we're 2 days before a game and we can pick, okay, drills A through D are going to be perfect from an output standpoint of what we think will prepare us both from a session theme point of view and an external and internal load point of view. But if we look back at the historical subjective data on when we did those certain sessions and how it matched with like, well, it may have looked good on from an external and internal standpoint, but from a wellness standpoint, like just like that, like we could have been doing certain things that might not have registered really well with our wearable data that um, only really like the opinions and feedback from the athletes are going to give us like that full picture, so to speak.
Oh yeah, and well, because people put a lot of stock into those numbers, but really those numbers don't. They can't give you all of it. I think that the ball striking is a great example. Another one is like people look at like IMI and those sort of things with catapult and basketball, and they wonder why the big guys fatigue fast, but their load numbers with that aren't very high. And it's like, well, because they're sumo wrestling under the basket with
Yeah,
another
exactly.
giant, and that doesn't show up. But if you look at their heart rate and it's spiking through the ceiling and you don't know why, it's because, well, he's fighting for position with another monster, right?
Yeah.
For like 5 seconds and then moving to the other side and battling again. So I think that's pretty rad. And you talked about something coming in that I'm really interested in hearing you dive into a little more. You talked about the coaches undulating the week
Yep.
and how they said it. How did you discuss that with them? And then what is the model that you guys try to follow with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The answer to the first part of that question isn't very sexy at all. Honestly, the new coaches that we have come in right off the bat, I think understood periodization of training relatively well, and they kind of already, I think, had a really good understanding of how to undulate different loads and sessions. So I didn't have to make, I didn't have to approach them and be like, hey, the monotony of our training is through the roof. We're putting a ton of strain on these athletes. Like already they were really good at balancing out what demands that they felt appropriate were for our athletes. So I think only the few things that we worked with them a little bit on is, they were really good at undulating the training load. So again, that's the ambiguity of that. I don't think that one number really paints the full picture. So they were, training load was going, high, medium, low, back to very high or whatever it was for whatever time of year that we wanted. But certain things like individual metrics, like the total distance, may have been pretty monotonous throughout the training week, or our amount of cutting was very similar each time. And we were getting some sort of like, we would really only have like differentiation of maybe one variable at a time per session that was undulating that training load. So getting them to understand like, maybe, hey, we want to plan out like a little bit better of like, give me like 2 or 3 physical qualities that you want uh, for these girls today. So like, what do you want to accomplish? Is it, do you want just a lot of volume? Do you want a lot of time on their feet? Do you want them to be running really fast, get a really high sprint count? Do you want to be in really close? Do you want to have a small pitch with a ton of the like level 3, level 4 excels, decels? And I think from there they started to kind of understand like how those individual variables differentiated that training load. And so we started doing, so I'll give kind of an in-season training week example. So we typically play games Thursday, Sunday during fall for soccer. And it's really tough to kind of plan around that and undulate the loads around that. So Monday is typically going to be our off day. Tuesday, we'll usually have a pretty decent spike. So we'll call it like a moderately heavy day. Wednesday being just a moderate day. And then Thursday being, a very heavy day because it's typically a match day. Friday being a very light day, Saturday being kind of a moderate day, and then Sunday being another very heavy day. So the thing now, that was from kind of that overarching training load concept. So things that we kind of tried to dive in a little bit deeper to. So Tuesday, there was kind of a moderately hard day. We wanted to get a little bit of exposure to high speed running, but that kind of be their more volume oriented day. Wednesday being, we didn't want them to have too neurally fatiguing day right before their first match of the week. So that'd be kind of a more moderate volume day, but not a lot of cutting. Match days, just kind of a cluster. They get it all. Friday, it was almost basically an off day for them. The starters would do kind of a regen session with me, and bench players would do kind of a 45-minute, really dense session. So it would be a lot of high speed, a lot of high magnitude cuts. But overall, for the team, it kind of balanced out to be like a light day. For those, bench players or low to no minute players, it was just kind of get them up to making sure they're not falling down the ladder as the high minute players are climbing up the ladder. Saturday going to be another, I think I said like kind of moderate day. Sorry, bounced out there. And that day we try to get a little bit of high speed, not too much. Try to limit the amount of cuts again. So it'd be pretty comparable to like the Wednesday. And then again, going back into Sunday match day. So I think originally it was, they just kind of saw maybe that training load, how that was undulating. They're like, oh, great, we're doing good. But like maybe the distance that we were covering every day was very similar. So we were getting really stagnant and really monotonous with certain variables, where the undulation may have just came from like time in certain heart rate zones. So I think to paint the full picture, we tried to add a little bit more to it and give them a little clearer picture of what else is kind of the identifiers of what is, what is the stress that they're being exposed to. And I think they started to understand that. And, I think we did a pretty good job throughout the end of the season of doing that. And that I think we had a really good plan going for the spring and how we were going to organize our training weeks from there. But, obviously that kind of got thrown out the window now, but that's okay.
Yeah, man. So it goes. MT beat me to it. She's asking if lifting only Tuesday in season, but I guess following up on that, if you could dive a little deeper into how all of this then affected whatever you'd be doing off the pitch as well. Like, because other than, you mentioned the recovery day on Friday, it was, right?
Yep.
With the women that play more. Like, how would you then, how would all of these numbers impact what your preparation work was, if at all, in a positive and negative sense?
Yeah. So my theory is I want to make sure that I'm complementing comparable demands in whatever they're doing off the pitch. So on the days where we are a little bit more high volume, I'd say in season, we probably follow a little bit more of a daily undulated model in like the weight room or what they're doing from just a strength conditioning sense. So their volume day on the field is going to be a lot like the volume day in the weight room. Their very neurally taxing day on the field is probably going to be a little bit more explosive in the weight room, or before practice, that may be when I expose them to a couple shuttles or just a couple sprints or some type of short run that's fast. And on those recovery days, again, I'm not really exposing them to too much. Friday was probably right, wrong, or indifferent, just kind of how it worked with our schedule. Friday, that recovery day, was the day that I always got everybody into the weight room. And Tuesday, it was kind of like half and half. So we didn't really spend as much time as I probably would have wanted off the pitch with me during season. But with the low to no minute players, I think I got a little bit more that I could do with them, with matching the practice and weight room demands. But yeah, again, I mean, my theory is just to kind of try to complement what the coaches are doing with, if they're running on a big open pitch for long periods of time and they're accruing a lot of high speeds, then I want to try to match that with, maybe a couple sprints post practice, or make sure that beforehand, we've done whatever preparatory, like pre-sprint work or hamstring work that we need to do to kind of get them ready for that type of day. So I think that we were really congruent in like how we tried to give certain demands to the athletes, um, so that it matched up pretty well. And did we do a perfect job? I There's no way to tell. I don't think so. I think it could always be better, but I think that the athletes themselves and the coaches appreciated that, like, they could always go into a certain day expecting, like, okay, like, I know today's going to be just a hard day, period, whether it's in the weight room, in conditioning, in some sort of change of direction activity, or in our skill work, or, it's that conversely, I guess, like, we're going to come in and it's a really easy day. Like, I know I don't have to worry about it. Like, I know it's going to be easy practice. And I know when we go into the weight room, like, it may just be sort of regenerative based. We'll get some FRC work in, more stretch stuff, just kind of hit some accessories, and that be it. So I think it's good for the athletes too. Whether it's the best theory to follow, I don't really know, but I think it worked well for us.
No, I dig it. It sounds like it was at least well planned out. So then I guess the next question is, you brought up, that you got into some subjective means with that as well. How much input was then allowed from the athletes into this entire process?
Yeah, so the athletes probably get sick of all the subjective input that they give us, but I think at the same time they understand how valuable it is. So we don't ask a whole lot from them. Basically, we try to get from them just their sleep, to identify sleep habits, because we don't have fatigue science or any sort of wearable that can help us track that. We try to get session RPE, and then the main thing we look at is the body scores, which is just a scale of 1 to 10 pain, scale of 1 to 10 soreness, for whatever they feel after practice, because that's usually the last thing they have in the day. So when when I create like the practice reports of, like, okay, here were the drills that you guys did, here's all the external loading, the internal stuff, and then here's what they subjectively felt. So they every session that we run, we get subjective input from them on how whatever we exposed them to made them feel and how hard they thought it was. And usually it matches up pretty well. Like, if we go into knowing, like, hey, this is going to be one of those neural days, and this is going to be a really dense training session, and they're probably going to be pretty fried after, and they're probably going to say, they're achy and whatnot. So I think that as far as like going into consideration of what they're telling us, usually, hopefully, it's just matching up with what we're trying to get out of them. Like, I think that it only really becomes interventionist when we, either the coaches or myself, expose them to something and we see something kind of come up that we didn't expect. Like, an example would be like that week before postseason last year, when we had a lot of ball striking and we saw a lot of hip flexors and quads kind of flaring up from just a lot of extra hard strikes on the ball that we can't pick up with our wearables. So, and I think for us to, like, relaying to them that, like, hey, we saw that you guys said this. We appreciate that and understand. Like, so we're making this training adjustment, and so they feel less. It feels like less of a chore to them when they do have to fill out these questionnaires and give us their subjective input after every session. But I think, again, like, I think it really mainly stops at, like, usually, hopefully, it's just agreeing with what we're trying to expose them to on or off the pitch.
How much education was there necessarily, or was there at all, to get them to understand that, like, those days that you're calling neural, like, where they were dinged up, like, telling us that you're dinged up doesn't mean that it's going to be easier next time. Like, this is a
Yeah.
byproduct of what you should be going through.
Yeah. So I think helping them understand the training plan of, and I think consistency is really key with that too. So when we tell them like why this is going to be one of the hard days and why relative to the rest of the week it's going to be one of the hard days and why you're going to get a little bit easier of a day this day, they start to buy into that a little bit. So I mean, of course, explaining the why and then staying consistent with it, um, which in season with a consistent schedule it's a little bit easier to do that. I think out of season, um, if they kind of feel like it's a little bit more unorganized if we don't explain it to them. So there's definitely a little bit of teaching in that. There's also a little bit of teaching in getting reliable results from them from their subjective input as well. So I think when we first started doing that, no one really knows what like a 10 out of 10 on a pain or soreness scale is. Someone thinks like, oh, we did squats today, so my quads are a 9 out of 10, even though it was like you did like 4 sets of 5 at a really lightweight, like you're fine. And also like the subjective RPE of the session too. Like we have freshmen coming in that think that what's probably like even a moderately light, moderate practice for us is more of a hard or very hard practice for them. They're just not accustomed to that demand of practice quite yet. So it definitely takes a little bit of teaching to get them to understand, why we're doing certain things and exposing them to certain things on certain days. And then, why the authenticity and the reliability of what they're telling us is important, so that, we can, rely on trying to make decisions based off a lot of the wellness data that they're giving us as well.
Yeah, I dig it. I dig it. I think that the one thing that I would ask is, do you think that maybe coaching them to understand those things maybe is manipulating the answers so that they give you more of what you're expecting?
I think that's a really good point. I think it just kind of goes with the approach that you give them on it. I don't think we tell them like preemptively, like, or like after the fact, sorry, so postemptively, that like, hey, today like is going to be about a 7 out of 10. Okay, so like your RPE should probably be a 7 out of 10. It's more like, as goofy as it is, like giving them just those little like face maps of like the smiley face being the one and then like the dead sweaty face being the number 10, like hey, where do you think you match up along this? So giving them some uh, like kind of a measure to gauge themselves off of without us really telling them too much of like, this is how you should feel, because I think that's a really good point. We try not to like what they give us. Now there's all to go against myself there. We also don't want them to do those 4 sets of 5 squats at a really light weight and then say like, oh, I'm dead, I pulled my quads, because they're a little bit sore, because they just don't understand like a pain or soreness. So I think there's a little bit of education, but yeah, I think you're right. I think if you go too much into it, then you can start manipulating the numbers to what we want to see as coaches, which kind of takes the value out of it.
Mm-hmm. No, because I've just seen people that like have done it the way that you mentioned, like that is not the goal. Like people would look at the numbers and be like, "Are you out of your mind? That wasn't an 8. That was like 4."
Yeah.
And then it's just like, well, then maybe the problem is you thought it was a 4 and it's an 8.
Right.
Like maybe you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, and I'll definitely add like we never specifically go to the athlete, like using that quad example again. Like I'm never gonna go to that athlete and be like, you're being a baby, like you're just a little bit sore. It's more like from a team standpoint, we'll like maybe resend out like those subjective scales of like, hey guy, like be authentic, like where do you think you lie on this scale? And so there's definitely a trust factor with what we give them. And it's never going to be perfect, but
Yeah.
yeah, we try to ride that fine line between being manipulative and not getting valuable input from them.
Did you find those numbers change at all when like school was hard?
Oh, absolutely. So another one, we ask them their stress levels as well. So sleep, stress, RPE, and pain and soreness. So the stress, yeah, I think plays a big role. And we didn't really like. I don't know if like we just didn't like we had it just to like see like maybe okay like when's the most academic stress time coming in, like usually a lot of professors kind of hit these, like everyone's given exams in this 1 week, so everyone's stressed out this 1 week, and we just kind of wanted to see that um, from more of a team basis, but we didn't look at it too much from an individual standpoint. And I think that we could have done a lot better of a job with that. And I think that as we started to see a few more outliers of maybe not so much school related stuff, but relationships or family and stress scores coming up from an individual standpoint where the team may not be, um, a lot of times, like yeah, their pain and soreness scales were rising up with it. And our AMS does a really good job if we want to answer questions like that. Like if we have an athlete who is rating a lot higher than normal, they've gone up a couple or one or two standard deviations on where their body scores are typically at, and we can run a correlation between that and how their stress scores have been, or like a combination of their stress and sleep, and see how well those pair up. And there's usually a really really good relationship. So um, it's hard from an individual standpoint like that to make a lot of training interventions, because I mean you have to train the team at the end of the day. But I definitely think that there's been a couple days or a couple cases where maybe we have, in a soccer example, like maybe we just throw someone in at a neutral because we know they're going through a lot. They don't have to do too much reps, um, so they get a little bit less demand out of it. Because like yeah, we want to accomplish more from either the internal or external load standpoint, but if that's going to be at the cost of them feeling shittier at the end of the day, like that's not worth it. So yeah, we
Yeah,
definitely want
or a hamstring.
factor too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, dude, I'm with you. I dig that. I think that that's something that's important, and it's hard to manage at times, because it's like Cardell Jones said it best, right? Like he didn't go there to play school, and like there are definitely some kids who think that,
Yeah.
and there are some kids who think school is the end all be all. It's like that story Cal says. I don't know if you've heard it, where like he had a guy who, like an NHL player who like something happened and he was all over the news for this, that, and the third, and like he was fine, he didn't care, but then like his ex-wife called and like his stress scores went through the roof and was like losing his mind. So it's like stress is stress, but stress is stress to you, and stress is stress to me. And then like if a kid's tweaking out about school, like let's say you care about school and I don't give a shit, like we're in the same classes though. Now you're getting practice altered because your stress scores are all messed up. It's like, well, I got midterms too. It's like, how do you tell a kid at that point? Well, yeah, you do, but you don't give a shit. Like we know you don't care. So like, why are we going to change practice? Like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter to you. Or
Yeah.
even more so, what you see, like people get pissed sometimes when you pull them from reps. It's like, why am I getting pulled? And they're doing this stuff, and it's like, well, because you know, got to live to fight another day.
Yeah. No, that's a great point too. I think we're pretty lucky with the compliance of the athletes that we have. But there's of course going to be those, ones that don't want to get pulled or don't want to go in when they are feeling stressed. And, again, I don't think there's ever going to be that like perfect system on how you balance that. But I think at the end of the day for us, like if we are trying to do, we don't want to have this like abstract mosaic of like what the athlete looks like. We want to paint the clearest picture of them as possible. And I think that it seems like a lot, and to some people it may be unnecessary, but I think if we're collecting that internal loading, the external loading, and the subjective data, that we're at least painting the clearest picture of the athlete and where they're at as possible. So as long as we can do that and find ways to apply that to like what we're exposing them to in training sessions or how we need to manipulate training sessions, then I think that's where the utility of it all comes out of. And are wearables the end all be all and how you can identify that? Like, no, absolutely not. But they're definitely a useful tool in how we can identify that. I was talking to Alex Carnal at Memphis, and he was at a school where they didn't have the resources to get something like Polar or Catapult or Strive. So he just had with his system, which I thought was pretty good, is he took who he believed were like the three most reliable people on the team, and after every drill, he would time each drill, and those three athletes would come off. They knew after every drill they would tell him like, hey, that was an 8 out of 10, or that was a 6 out of 10, and then he would average that and then multiply it by the minutes to get some sort of load minute, and he would categorize drills and things by that. And what is that doing? Like, exactly the perfect job that I say perfect, as good of a job as like some of these wearable companies are doing? Like, no, maybe not, but are you still getting some sort of framework on how you can like subsequently program or help coaches program practices or what demands that you're going to expose them to maybe in the weight room or conditioning? Yeah, absolutely. So there's other avenues that I think can give just as advantageous of an effect as well.
No doubt, man. No doubt. Listen, brother, I appreciate the time. This is some rad stuff. I gotta get rocking and rolling here, but hopefully I don't mess up and screw up screen grabbing this today like I did yesterday. Sorry, Mark. I'm a jerk. But yeah, dude, I appreciate your time, and this is some great stuff. I think a lot of this, the insight into what people actually do with the tech, is important because I think a lot of people are like, "Yeah, we've got this." And it's like, well, what do you do with it? And they're like, "Well, we hand it out and we take it back." So I appreciate the candidness and the openness, brother. This is rad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you talking to me too, man. It was great, and look forward to hopefully doing it again at some point.
Yeah, brother. Appreciate you, man. Have a good one. Cheers.
Awesome, Jay. You too, man.
See ya.